So join me in welcoming Ron Cobb.
Thank you, Susan. Can you hear me? Does it sound good? Okay, great. I would like us to begin our time together by engaging in a thought experiment. Imagine that instead of being in this meeting room, that we're actually in a time machine. And our destination today is to travel back to central Pennsylvania in the early 1700s. Now, trip proceeds smoothly enough, we're going along, and as we almost reach our destination, we suddenly encounter the most severe turbulence that any of us has ever experienced. After some really, really terrifying moments, we somehow managed to land safely on the gentle slopes of the 18th century Commonwealth. So we all breathe a sigh of relief. The captain informs us she has good news, and I guess it's not so good news. The good news is, despite the obvious malfunction in our vehicle, we have managed to land safely. And the bad news, well, we are 300 years back in the past, and we don't have the technology to repair our vehicle. So the captain informs us we are all now permanent residents of this 18th century agricultural paradise. Now, as you sit here stunned thinking this isn't the trip I signed up for, trying to get your head around the notion that you are going to spend the rest of your life in the 18th century, I have a question for you. How many of you will easily find a job in your current line of work? You see, in the agrarian age, there were no executives, no managers, no analysts. There were no human resource specialists. There were no pilots, no telemarketers, no computer programmers. There weren't even professional athletes. All of these jobs are products of the industrial age and simply did not exist in the agrarian age. It is at that point that you suddenly realize you're not just in a different time and place, you are in a completely different world with a completely different set of rules. Let's see if this works better. We find ourselves in a similar position today. Kelly mentioned we're coming out of this recession, but we are coming into a completely different world. If you have had the opportunity over the last year or so to walk through our local airport here out at DIA, you may have seen the very thoughtful ad from the University of Denver that proclaims the top 10 jobs of 2015 don't exist today. It turns out we do not have to step into a time machine to find ourselves in a completely different world with a completely different set of rules. We just have to be residents of the early 21st century. Is this annoying? This in and out? Okay. It's annoying to me. I'm going to turn this thing off because it ain't working. And I'm going to use my New York voice. If I start to fade away, will somebody in the back raise the hand? Is this still working for you? Okay, well, all right, we're looking good. Okay, as I mentioned, you don't have to step into a time machine to find yourself in a completely different world with a completely different set of rules, okay? You just got to be a resident of the early 21st century. Now, I want you to hold on to that thought, because we're going to come back to that. But it seems there's some commotion at the far end of the room. Along on this journey with us was a group of engineers. They were attending another meeting here in Colorado. They stepped off that time machine, looked around and said, 18th century, nice place to visit. Sure don't want to live here. And so with a lot of determination, a lot of effort, and a little bit of luck, they have come up with an innovative way to repair our time machine. Well, you are ecstatic. You go out and find one of these engineers, you shake her hand and say, thank you, thank you, thank you. I really thought I was going to be stuck in this place. And she looks at you and said, so did I, and so did the rest of my colleagues. Until one of them stepped forward and pooled our collective knowledge. She said, once we put our heads together, we actually came up with the solution rather quickly. She smiles and says, I guess it just goes to show you, nobody is smarter or faster than everybody. Well, you happily get on the time machine. We're going along. The engineers have done a terrific job. This flight's just going terribly smoothly, and the captain says, you know, it would be a shame to waste this trip. So we're going to make a couple of stops along the way. Our first stop, believe it or not, is a place called Newark, Delaware. The year is 1958. You're walking around. You spend some time looking over the place. Your feet are kind of tired. You see a park bench. You sit down. You look across and there's a gentleman. He's scribbling on a pad across from you. You get to talking with him. You find out he's just completed a 17-year stint at the DuPont company, but he's left them because he wants to start a new company, and he wants his company to be very different. And you go, oh really, how so? He says, well, I noticed when I was at DuPont, the best conversations, the best communication we ever had was in the carpool. When we got away from the hierarchies and the chains of command. He says, I want my company to be like the carpool all day long. So you say, well, how are you going to do that? He says, well, I've given a lot of thought. He says, in my new company, there'll be no organization charts, no chains of command, no protocols for communication. There'll be no supervisors because I believe nobody is smarter or faster than everybody. And I don't want a single person to have the authority to kill a good idea or to keep a bad idea alive. And so in my new company, all work will be accepted rather than assigned. You think to yourself, I thought the captain said this was 1958. I thought all the dope smoking started in the 60s. This guy got an early start. So then you look at him and go, oh, I get it. You're pulling my leg. This is a joke, right? He goes, no, I'm dead serious. He says, I really believe nobody is smarter or faster than everybody. You go, this is crazy. I mean, this isn't even organized chaos. This is absolute chaos. How will anything get done? Why would anybody do any work? And he says, no, I think this is going to work quite well. He says, the collective knowledge of the people will determine what we do. And he said, there'll be plenty of incentive to do work because people's compensation will be determined by their peers. And so there'll be incentive to do more rather than less work. Well, you think to yourself, I still think this is a crazy idea, but you look at your watch and say, I've got to get back to the time machine. You shake his hand, you wish him well, you walk away and say, yeah, good luck with that. Our time machine travels on. Our next stop, Palo Alto, California. The year is 1998. You're walking around. It's a gorgeous, beautiful California day. You see these two young gentlemen. They look like they're barely out of college. You see they're caught up in a very enthusiastic conversation. You want to find out what all the excitement is about. So you get to talking with them. You find out they're about to start a new venture, but all their friends say they're nuts. And you go, well, why is that? They say, well, our new venture is going to be a search engine. And believe me, in 1998, the last thing the world needed was another search engine, especially when it looked like Yahoo was about to break out from a very crowded field of upstarts, because Yahoo had by far the best editorial experts. But these two gentlemen tell you they think the internet is going to explode over the next decade. And there'll be more web pages than even the best of editorial experts can keep up with. And they tell you that they believe nobody is smarter or faster than everybody. So their search engine is going to use the wisdom of the crowd to rank the pages. And then it dawns on you. You know who these two guys are. This is Sergey Brin. This is Larry Page. They're about to start one of the most successful business enterprises of all time. And you're dying to tell them how successful they're going to be. But you can't, because when you agreed to come on this time machine journey, you signed an agreement that you would not tell anybody in the past what was in store for them in the future. And so you think, I better get out of here because I don't think I can control myself. So you enthusiastically shake their hands, say, good luck with that. You start walking back and you can't help yourself. You turn around, you look at them, and you say, have you got a name for this new venture? And they say, well, no, not really. We've been thinking about a few. And so you smile and say, how about Google? And one of them says, wow, that's cool. We'll really have to think about that. Well, our time machine brings us all the way back. Here we are back in Denver, December 2010, and you have had a most interesting journey. You were almost marooned in the 18th century, but thank God those engineers got you out of there. You met some really interesting people along the way, and you kept hearing a common theme over and over again. Nobody is smarter or faster than everybody. Well, you know, for Google, they turned that proposition into a very successful operating and business model that has made them the premier company of our day. Makes you wonder how things turned out for that other guy you met back there in Newark, Delaware. So you do a little digging around, and you find out that Bill Gore, that was the name of the gentleman you met back there in 1958, he unfortunately passed away in 1986. But his company lives on. As a matter of fact, his company today has 9,000 workers in 30 countries around the world. And you find out they've made a profit in every year of their existence. And wow, they are perennially on the list, Fortune's list, of the top 10 companies to work for, many times occupying the #1 spot. So you think to yourself, well, obviously, Mr. Gore gave up his drug habit because he certainly has put together one heck of a company. Imagine your surprise when you find out that today, in 2010, at W.L. Gore & Associates, the makers of Gore-Tex and other innovative products, there still are no organization charts, still no chains of command, still no protocols for communication. There are now, and there never have been, in the 50-plus year history of this company, any supervisors. No one has ever had the authority to kill a good idea or keep a bad idea alive, because at Gore, all work is still accepted rather than assigned. Wow, you think to yourself, maybe there really is something to this notion, nobody's smarter or faster than everybody. Remember, I told you before to hold on to a thought. And that thought was this: you do not have to step into a time machine to find yourself in a different world with a completely different set of rules. You just have to be a resident of the early 21st century. We may be coming out of the recession, as Kelly mentioned before, but we are indeed in a different world. We are on the threshold today of a tipping point of a new business reality for which I believe many, if not most companies and their business leaders are completely unprepared. The signs are all around us. They're in plain sight, but we do not see them because we continue to see the world through the social lens of a 19th century management model that is rapidly losing relevance. This new world, I call it the Wiki world. Wiki is the Hawaiian word for quick or fast. And what certainly characterizes this world we are in now, it is a permanently fast-forward world. That may explain why there are so many change management initiatives, but I don't have to tell this group more than 75% of change management initiatives fail. Perhaps that's because the notion of change management is probably an oxymoron. Because to think that you could manage change is to imply that you could somehow control change. I got a surprise for you. Change is going to happen, whether you approve it or not. You can't control it. The central business challenge facing companies today is not whether or not they can manage change, it's whether or not they can manage at the pace of change. And that is an entirely different proposition, because the only way that you can manage at the pace of change, especially if your company is a top-down hierarchy, is you will have to change how you manage. Because unlike 1958, Mr. Gore designed his company for innovation. And in 1958, designing for innovation was an option, which is why Mr. Gore did not change the landscape of management. Gore was the pathfinder. Google's the game changer. I would suggest to you that the last large major organization that will be a top-down hierarchy has been built and designed. There will be no more. Every major large organization that is created from here will look like Google and not like General Motors. That means the central business challenge facing every organization if they want to sustain themselves is they have to shift from a top-down hierarchy to a peer-to-peer network, because it is now an imperative that businesses have the capacity to innovate. In a fast-forward world, if you can't innovate, you can't adapt. And if you can't adapt, you can't keep up. Top-down hierarchies are unsustainable because they are not designed for innovation. Innovating in a hierarchy is like running on a treadmill. You cover a lot of distance, you burn a lot of calories, you work really hard. At the end of the run, you've gone nowhere. You cannot have a management model that is designed to stay in place. You have to be able to innovate. You have to be able to adapt. Now, I told you before, the signs are all around us. They're in plain sight. There are lots of companies, eBay, Amazon, Starbucks, Whole Foods, Best Buy, IBM, of course, Gore and Google, who are already peer-to-peer networks or are well on their way to moving to becoming peer-to-peer networks. And when you look at these companies, you find out that they have 5 disciplines in common, 5 practices, if you will, the 5 new rules of managing in the Wiki world. And there's a piece of paper at your seat that has these on there. The first of these rules, understand what's most important to customers. Despite all the rhetoric about how important customers are and listening to customers, top-down hierarchies usually start with what is most important to the bosses. You may have seen the recent CNBC special that focused on Ford and its remarkable turnaround. Alan Mulally, their new CEO, when he came in, one of the first things he did, he took the senior leadership team, he put them on a plane, he flew them to Connecticut, to the offices of Consumer Reports. They sat down. As Alan said, Consumer Reports, boy, do they have data. And they were more than willing to share all the data they had about their Ford vehicles. And as they sat down and gave their report, it was one ugly picture. And they weren't too far into this report before a couple of the Ford executives started saying, well, I know that's what the data said, but you need to understand. After this happened a couple of times, Alan Mulally stopped the meeting. And he looked at his colleagues and says, we are here to listen, and we are here to take notes. He was reminding them, we are not here to advocate or explain what is important to the bosses. We are here to learn and understand what's most important to the customers. And these good people at Consumer Reports are going to give us a window into what's important to customers. And so for the rest of that meeting, they listened and they took notes, and they went back to Detroit, and they used that as their roadmap. If you sit down with Consumer Reports today, you are going to get a much prettier picture about Ford vehicles. Now, whether Ford makes it to transforming totally to a peer-to-peer network remains to be seen. They have work to do, but they are off to a good start because they understand this first rule of understand what's most important to customers. The second rule, learn how to leverage collective knowledge. In every one of your organization, there is an incredibly rich resource. In most of your companies, it is your richest resource. It is fully paid for, requires no investment. It also happens to be the most untapped resource in almost every company, and it is the collective knowledge of your own people. What top-down hierarchies lack are the processes to tap into it. Fully paid for, already exists. On January 2nd, 2001, Larry Sanger met with his old friend Ben Corbett for dinner. Ben was moving to San Diego. Larry had moved to San Diego a year earlier to take a job as an editor for a startup online encyclopedia called Newpedia. And over that dinner, Larry was sharing with Ben what a rough year they had, despite the fact that they had assembled an incredible group of academic experts and then put in place a sterling example of the 7-step review process that every good encyclopedia should have. At the end of this first year, they had a grand total of 25 some odd articles. Larry looked at Ben and said, at this pace, we'll be ready at the start of the 3rd millennium. So Ben looked at him and said, well, have you ever heard of the Wiki webpage? He said, what's that? He says, well, it's this software application that the software specialist has. It seems that in every computer system there's a basic set of routines. They're non-proprietary, they're standard. And these software specialists said, why should we keep recreating these every time we start a new program? Why don't we just have them sitting out there in cyberspace in common, and we can all, and as a matter of fact, we'll make it really superlative because we'll all work on it together and anybody can use it. And since it's non-proprietary, there won't be any problem. He said, you might want to look at the Wiki website and bring that to your encyclopedia. So Larry goes to his boss, Jimmy Wales, and tells him about it. And Wales says, oh, I've been hearing about this Wiki website. Let's do it. So on January 10, 2001, the Wiki software is added to Nupedia, and the academics go ballistic. There is no way that the masses can make a contribution to the scholarly pursuit of building an encyclopedia. They are outraged. They said, we will not be part of rabble-rousing with the crowd. Wales throws up his hands and says, okay, guys, you win. And 5 days later, on January 15th, 2001, Wiki software is removed from Nupedia. But Wales says, you know, I still think this is a great idea. So he decides to start a second project. And Larry dubs that Wikipedia. And you know the rest of this story. None of us have ever heard of Nupedia. And every one of us is using Wikipedia. Larry Sanger, Jimmy Wales make an incredible leap to extraordinary performance because they learn how to leverage collective knowledge. The third rule, bring everybody together in open conversations. If nobody is smarter or faster than everybody, this third rule has got to be built into your organizational DNA. I learned this firsthand in 1997 when I became the leader of the operations of the Blue Cross Blue Shield Federal Employee Program. In 1997, we had just completed 2 decades of horrible performance. In the late 70s, we had watched our market share plummet drastically and quickly from 62 to 39%. We almost went out of business in 1981, and we barely hung on from 1981 through 1997, recapturing a mere 4 percentage points of our market share. In 1997, we were a low-performing organization. We had a performance index that measured our claims and customer service operations, and that's the guts of an insurance business. That's what touches you as customers. In that performance index, 100 was considered excellence, 120 was walking on water, 80 was threshold. We were at 78. So we had just completed 20 years of being a no-growth, low-performing company. And so our challenge is turn this into a high-performing, high-growth business again. So as we looked around and said, what are we going to do? The first thing we recognized is we use a command and control management model, and we have command authority over nobody. Doesn't make sense. You see, the Blue Cross Blue Shield Federal Employee Program is not a vertically integrated business. It's a business alliance of 39 independent Blue Cross Blue Shield plans. They're all independent companies with their own board. But why do we use command and control? It's all we knew. It's all most people in this room knew. We said, well, that's probably part of the problem. So if we're going to succeed, we have to shift from managing by command to managing by consensus. And when you've got to do that across 39 independent organizations, it's a little bit scary. Our solution, this third rule, is the secret to the success of the turnaround that we were able to accomplish. We learned the value of bringing everybody together in open conversations. Now, of course, as large as we were, we literally couldn't get everybody in the room, but what we could do is get a microcosm of the business in the room. And so we invented a meeting format, because one of the things we recognized is we could never get anything done. You think the Republicans and the Democrats have trouble getting along? You get 39 Blue Cross Blue Shield plans in a room, okay? I'll take the Republicans and Democrats any day, all right? Our meetings were hijack experiences, where a couple of people would take over the room and the rest of us are silent hostages. And at the end of the meeting, okay, the hijackers have just become more entrenched in their position. Now, you all have never been in any meetings like this, I know, okay, but we had this problem all the time. And at the end of it, some project manager would say, well, this is what I heard over the course of the day, and this is what we're going to do, and we all left the room and nobody would do it, okay? Of course, that never happens in your company, okay? We had to stop that. If we were going to manage by consensus, we couldn't have these fruitless debates. So we invented a meeting process called work-through. And work-through today is the bulk of my business in terms of working with companies to access their collective knowledge. But a work-through is a different kind of meeting, Because we recognize in hierarchical organizations, upper level people meet with the upper level people, mid people with the mid people, people across the processes meet together. Well, what if we got everybody and mixed them all up? So in a work through, and with 60 people, we'd have senior leaders, we have middle managers, people close to the processes, you got finance, you got marketing, you got operations, medical. What you wanted was if anything came up in the course of this meeting that would impact anybody, they could jump up and say, wait a minute. Because in a functional organization, two areas may know they have a problem, they work it out, and they don't realize they've affected the third area. The third area doesn't know they're affected because they weren't in the room, and you don't discover it till the 11th hour when you have no options. That's a problem if you got to be innovative, all right? If we were going to drive consensus, we had to know our issues up front. And so what made the work-throughs work was some rules we put in place, because we had to stop the debate. And the way we stopped the debate was this. A work-through would move between small group discussions and then presentations and large group discussions. Most presentations followed the small group discussions. And when the presentation was given, we put in place these two rules. Number one, the presenter will present without interruption. But the second one was the more powerful one. After the presentation is over, you can only ask clarifying questions. No agreements, no disagreements, no other ways of seeing it, no different agendas, no let's bring this in. All you can do is ask clarifying questions. Now you might say, well, I thought you said bring people together in open conversations. That doesn't sound open. An open conversation is not a free-for-all. An open conversation does not mean I get to say whatever I want when I want. An open conversation is a disciplined conversation that has two dimensions. Number one, people listen. And number two, people are free to independently say whatever they think without fear of retaliation. And we had other rules to make sure that that was put in place. But by designing the meeting so that you couldn't debate, and if a debate broke out, we could stop it. Because usually if a debate happened, we'd have about 30 or 40 ideas coming out of the groups. We'd just throw the flip charts on the wall. We'd have people stand around the wall, and the discussion would be this. Find two items that look alike, call them out, and let's talk about them. If they are the same, we'll keep one, discard the other. If they're different, we'll clarify the language. When you change the discussion from how is this idea better than that to how is this idea different than that, you listen to both sides. When you are in the mindset of how is this idea better than that, you never listen to the other idea. But if you have to describe how this idea is different from that, you have to visit with both ideas. Another thing Kelly mentioned before, we have to change how we agree and disagree. Disagreements will exist. The whole purpose of this was to create shared understanding, which is a far greater driver than control, which is what we did in the work-throughs. But shared understanding is not same understanding. Shared understanding is about how we will agree to agree about our disagreements. Oftentimes when we would have those items on the wall, we'd come down to about 12 or 15. And then the way we had independent thinking and no fear of retaliation is we go around and give everybody strips of 4 dots and say among those 12 to 15 items, you place your dots any way you want. If you got passion around one item, you can throw all 4 dots on them. Just don't put a dot on an item you don't care about. With everybody voting, you don't know who's doing what, and you don't have to speak just with voices. There are other ways that you can hear the voices other than speaking, and you need these dynamics if you're going to be innovative. What would be interesting is after the voting was done, there's always a break point. It's usually after the 4th or 5th item, generally the 4th. You throw up the 4 items on a flip chart. And I can't tell you how many times I look and say, item number 1, that was important to one political group in the room. Item number 2, that was important to an opposing political group in the room. Item number 3 and 4, they're in common. And you know what? They bridge 1 and 2. And then you look at the chart and you say, can you all live with this? And everybody in the room says yes. And we have done what the Republicans and Democrats haven't been able to do so far. Find common ground, bringing together diverse ideas in a way that you had unanimous consensus. And we could do it within 48 hours, which is how long these work-throughs work. We learned how to drive consensus in a terribly politically fractured environment. In 2007, when I left Blue Cross Blue Shield, our performance index had risen from 78 to an unprecedented historical high of 104. In the first 2 years, it went from 78 to 96. Our market share increased 16 percentage points from 43 to 59. We became a high-growth, high-performing business, all because we learned how to bring everybody together in open conversations. And in addition to that, we made a leap to extraordinary performance, which is a benefit you get when you shift from top-down hierarchy to peer-to-peer networks. The fourth rule: focus on the critical few drivers of success. In my work with companies, I am amazed at how many managers do not know the difference between an outcome measure and a driver measure. They all know the outcome measures. Why? They're in performance appraisals, and they're the things we pay bonuses for, and they're the things Wall Street cares about. Now, I'm not saying outcome measures are not important. They are, and I do think you tie compensation to them. But they're not enough. They're just one dimension. See, a performance measurement system is, in a way, can tie hands behind your back, because in a performance measurement system, negative numbers are never your friends, because they're always bad performance. You need to have a measurement system in which negative numbers are sometimes your best friends. You need a learning measurement system alongside your performance measurement system. Learning measurement system oftentimes has driver measures. These are the early indicators that correlate with outcomes, and they have two values, one of which is extremely important if you have to innovate. The first value is the obvious one. They can let you know when things are off course, when corrective action is necessary so that the bad result never hits the outcome. But it's the second value that's the more important. They can let you know when corrective action is the wrong action and you need adaptive action. You can bet there is somebody inside Netflix who is looking at this number, the ratio of DVDs rented to movies downloaded. And I can tell you that number is going negative. And Netflix is treating that number as a best friend. They are not going out beating up their salespeople saying, get more DVD rentals. They're changing their business and operating model, recognizing that digital downloading is where it's going to be. And if Netflix is going to be a player in that market, they have to innovate and they have to adapt. If they remain in a top-down hierarchical mindset, the only action when you get the negative number is corrective action. And corrective action, when it is in the wrong model, it's a quick pathway to your death. It's one of the reasons why when I work with companies, I really encourage them to put in place a balanced scorecard, because it's a focused set of measures, no more than 15 to 20. Get the company to really think about them, and then identify which one are the drivers, which ones are the outcomes, and you need to have discussions about what is the market telling you. It's another way you can understand what's important to customers. The fifth and final rule is the most controversial, the most difficult. It will probably be the stumbling block that will cause many top-down hierarchies not to do what they need to do. And it is this: you hold people accountable to their peers, not to their bosses. And that is a radical shift. That was the wisdom of Bill Gore. I am amazed that this gentleman in 1958, long before the computer, internet and all this stuff, had the wisdom to recognize that networks are smarter and faster than hierarchies. Had the wisdom to recognize the real problem that giving people the authority to issue orders and expect compliance creates. In his company, he holds people accountable to their peers. The performance evaluation system at Gore is elegant and simple. It is this: everybody at Gore evaluates 20 people, everybody is evaluated by 20 people. And their instrument consists of one instruction. Please rate your 20 people in order of their contribution to Gore, from highest to lowest, and hand it in. And that's it. And Human Resources collects that. They do weighted values on that. And based on those results, that determines your compensation for the next year. That simple. That's how Gore holds people accountable to their peers. And remember, that company is year in and year out in the top 10 companies to work for. All right? Innovation is what they're all about. Now, as I work with companies, I tell them, no, if you got a top-down hierarchy, you don't all of a sudden say, okay, tomorrow we're going to be rid of all of the bosses and we're all going to be peers. It's too much too soon, okay? They started out that way. You don't have to eliminate the supervisors to make this transition. What you have to do is eliminate the sovereignty of the supervisors. Nothing will harm you more than a single person have the authority to kill a good idea, keep a bad idea alive. A single person has the authority that says, you keep your mouth shut when you're in a meeting with me and you have a different point of view. When I was a chief executive, I did not want that dynamic. I didn't care if the best idea for our company came from the analyst we hired 2 weeks ago who was graduating 3 weeks ago. If that was the best idea for our company, going to make us high growth, high performing, bring it forward. That's why we had work-throughs, so we could balance the voices. Some things that we did so that we could hold people accountable to their peers, because although the Blue Cross Blue Shield FEP program became a peer-to-peer network, we were in the context of a much larger organization that remained and continues to be highly command and control. So we couldn't change our performance evaluation tool, for example, but we put in place a couple of steps like identify internal customers and give them direct impact into the performance tool without the supervisor having the authority to edit it. We also had a rule: you couldn't be designated a high performer, which got you more compensation in terms of merit increase and bonus, if you didn't have the consensus of the entire senior leadership team. Because we didn't want anybody going around saying, I work for my boss, the rest of you be damned. And of course, you don't have anybody in your company that does anything like that, right? Okay. No, we wanted people treating each other as customers. And the other thing we put in place is cross-functional goals that would define bottom-up. And to make sure that they were done well, the senior leadership team agreed we would neither approve nor disapprove the goals. We would negotiate them, much like a real estate purchase, until both sides were comfortable we had reached a point. We did that because otherwise the bottom-up would just be just put something on a sheet of paper because they're going to do what they want anyway. All right? By negotiating, they had to take it seriously. But what was most important is they were talking among each other about how their jobs interrelated, building that shared understanding. If you go work for Whole Foods, you're not hired by a supervisor. You're hired by the team you're going to be working with. All right? If you work at Google, all right, your supervisor has 50 to 100 direct reports and can't subdivide them. Google does that on purpose because you can't micromanage 50 people. Okay, and they want to make sure that doesn't happen. And if you work for Google, of course, 20% of your time you self-determine and you don't even have to tell the supervisor what you're working on. Why? Because Google is designed for innovation. If you want to be designed for innovation, you find the mechanics in your company that work, that hold people accountable to their peers. The leader's role going forward is not to be the boss, it's to be the facilitator. The leader's job is not to persuade people because they are the smartest person in the room. That is an illusion. None of us is smarter or faster than everybody. The leader's job is to create the circumstances in which we get quick access to the collective knowledge. There is no doubt in my mind, I've never met most of you before, but every one of us together is far, far smarter than I could ever hope to be. And if we had to do something that got thrown in a room together, I would trust your collective knowledge 10 times out of 10 times before I would trust my own. And that's just not even... One of the things we discovered is, my God, we work with incredibly, powerfully intelligent people. Colorado has intelligent people. We're just touching the first level. The real intelligence is when you can access Colorado's collective knowledge. As you can see, I have a lot of passion around this notion, nobody's smarter or faster than everybody. And if you know any organization or association that could benefit from this, I sure would appreciate your handing me your card afterwards. You do not have to step into a time machine to find yourself in a completely different world with a completely different set of rules. You just have to be a resident of the early 21st century. You're already there. You thought it was just a joke when I said, wow, you're going to be in a different world for the rest of your life? I'm here to tell you it's real. You're there now. And if your company is a top-down hierarchy and you have something to do about it, I seriously, seriously encourage you to consider transforming your organization to a peer-to-peer network. And if you do those 5 things, understand what's most important to customers, learn how to leverage your collective knowledge, bring everybody together in open conversations, focus on the critical few drivers of success, and hold people accountable to peers, you will not only transform your business into a peer-to-peer network, but I think you'll discover, like we did at Blue Cross Blue Shield, you'll make a leap to extraordinary performance. Thank you very much.